passionate, driven, enthusiastic, euphoric. This is who we are as entrepreneurs. But how we leverage these incredible attributes to dream and build businesses that scale and grow is what this podcast is all about. Hello, I'm attorneypreneur Josh Brown, and welcome to Franchise Euphoria. What is freaky about you and why you must figure it out to find ultimate success in business and life? Hello, everyone. Josh Brown here, and I am thrilled to have the one and only Chris Brogan on today's show to talk about this very topic. Chris is the world's leading authority on owning the game you most want to win, combining a mix of professional leadership development and business strategy. Chris works with professionals like you to own your choices, own your life, and own your future. He is CEO of Owner Media Group, a highly sought-after professional speaker, and the New York Times bestselling author of 8 books and counting, including The Freaks Shall Inherit the Earth, Entrepreneurship for Weirdos, Misfits, and World Dominators. Hello, Chris, and welcome.
Josh, I'm just sad that this isn't a video show. Those are some amazing pants you're wearing today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. So, listen, your book, by the way, is fantastic. The Freaks Shall Inherit the Earth. Loved it. You were so kind. We met at Podcast Movement 2014, where you delivered a fantastic keynote. And then you gave away a bunch of your books, and you were so kind to sign it, and you signed one for me. And actually, you signed it for my daughter, which was fantastic, and she absolutely loves it. So I appreciate that. And really what I love about your book and your message is that it's all about finding the freak within. You know, we all bring a uniqueness to this world and to our businesses, and yet so many of us hide behind a facade and are afraid to be unique, to be ourselves. And true business magic and personal success comes when you embrace your freakness as opposed to hide it. And so I just like to kick this off by asking you, when did you embrace your own freakness?
I was 6 years old. The first time that I could tell you very clearly, and it was I had just received a new bicycle, a brand new Huffy Thunder Road, and my folks weren't in any way well off, and so the fact that this was literally a new bicycle that had never been touched by little grubby children's hands before was a beautiful thing. And I was trying to learn how to ride it, and with retrospect, everyone tells me what a dumb idea it was to try to learn how to ride a bike on a lawn, because there's no way to get momentum, as it turns out, and you basically are just falling prey to balance and gravity all day. In the process, I drove my bicycle right into the side of the house and smashed the front fender off of it. And through my tears and telling my mom how sad I was, I told her she had to move the house because clearly the house was in the way, Josh. And so that's when I learned that maybe in that entrepreneurial way that you see the world differently than everyone else, that maybe I also had a part to play.
Well, when did you have the courage outside of riding your bicycle in the grass to act on it in a business sense?
To be really honest, I've had that courage a long time and executed on, being weird, but for a long time it wasn't quite rewarded. So there was a lot of times where I was like, hey, let's storm the castle. And everyone said, sit down, for many, many years. And so it wasn't until probably 2006 when I realized that I could, join the circus. So right up until then, I had been, trying to use my freakiness inside of companies and to very limiting and small levels of success. But in 2006 is when I went and started working with entrepreneur Jeff Pulver to run one of his conferences and also to be community manager of his startup that he started like the day after we met. And so that's when I, started really applying it directly to a job. But before that, I tried really hard. I would, bring new ideas to any place I worked. And you'll appreciate this in the franchise world. I was trying to tell the people at Mrs. Fields Cookies about all these great new ideas I had. And they were like, just make the cookies, mall worker.
Okay, that just hits such a key point here. I love that you were in the corporate world. You were sort of in that area where you're trying to fit, a square peg into a round hole. You're trying to infuse your own personality. And it ties in so well to what I want to talk about today, because so many of my audience are stuck in this. They're either stuck in this corporate environment that they hate and they're trying like hell to break away from, or maybe they've already broken away or been broken away, been laid off, and now they're trying to figure out what is it that they can do. Perhaps they've had this burning desire, like it sounds like you've always had, to kind of infuse your own style, infuse your own personality, your own thoughts into something. But how do you know if you're best suited to do your own thing, or to maybe become part of a franchise where you're just implementing somebody else's systems or process, or to be in that sort of quasi situation, which I know you talk about in your book, The Freaks Shall Inherit the Earth, of, trying to do that within the confines of an organization, although it's got to kind of be a unique organization to allow that to happen.
It's the strangest thing. So as you're asking the question, I was trying to think through who doesn't need systems. And I was going to say, well, I guess if you're homeless, you don't need systems. But that's not true either. There are systems everywhere. If you're homeless, you have to figure out where's the best place to sleep where you're not going to get bothered. When's the best time to sleep? Because it turns out overnight isn't exactly great sleeping if you're outdoors, for instance. You need to know how and when to ask for stuff because you're still trying to, be fed and things like that. So, there's systems in everything we do. And the difference between someone who, in one way or another finds themselves outside of an existing platform or whatever. If you're in a franchise, you basically are saying, I commit to this system. If you're an employee, you're at least partly saying, I commit to this system. When you're the boss, you could say, I could do whatever I want. You're not the boss of me. But if you don't put real systems into place, you're going to have a challenge. And that's partly why I wrote The Freaks Shall Inherit the Earth, was because a lot of my artistic and creative friends were like, I can't have a system, man. It holds me down. And I said, well, how much more down can you be than living in your mom's basement? Because you can't sell anything from your art. So, it's not that everyone needs to be a business, but it does kind of merit some thinking that if you are trying to figure out how your business is supposed to be and you haven't figured out new systems for the road that you've just set up for yourself, you're going to meet with some bad times.
Well, I deal with the same thing. I speak to a lot of people who are creatives at heart, right? But yet they want to turn their creativity into a viable business, and yet their first inclination is, oh, I just need to set up a business and go, and I'll figure out how to charge people later. And sometimes I'll charge people, sometimes I won't, and I'll figure out all this other stuff. And I'm sitting there trying to go, listen, you've got to set this up with the foundation in place from the get-go, and you've got to walk through these particular questions that you've got to ask yourself to decide what kind of business you are, who you're serving, what kind of value you bring to the table. But I often find, Chris, and I wonder if you find this as well, that people don't take enough time at the outset to really think about what they want to do or where their freakness or their uniqueness fits in. So as an example, I meet with a lot of people who say, oh, I want to buy this franchise. And when you really break it down, you figure out they really don't want to buy that franchise. They just want to get the hell away from whatever it is that they're doing and get into something else. So what are some steps that you would recommend for people to really figure out at the outset who they are really, and then that will sort of guide them into what they should be doing from a business perspective?
What you're pointing out is really interesting, because a lot of times people will say things like, I really love to travel and I'm going to buy this gym franchise. Gyms are pretty stationary. Like you pretty much have to keep them where they are. So maybe that's not the franchise for you, because the other thing people do, especially in franchise purchasing, is they always want to own it and pick up the revenue, but they forget that a lot of times they're going to have to be in the business for a while, and they're going to be the desk guy, at whatever company it is they run. And so it's a challenge, because, you have to really start lining up some of what it means to you to do it. And it's so weird, because in my experience, again, tailoring this to your audience, but in my experience kind of dealing with franchise people, there's a food franchise called Moe's, and they're a sub shop kind of place, and they make a very specific kind of sub, which is, I'm raised in Maine, and they call it an Italian sandwich, and it is like the worst version of like a New York sub done by people in Maine. It's like hot dog roll is the bread. Like, not even joking. This is a totally true story. Hot dog roll is the bread, and the fillings of it or whatever are kind of more like, grocery store level meat compared to like, like if you try to think through what's like the opposite of the most quality version of a sub, that's what it is. And I'm not really making fun of Moe's because I was raised on that. So when I eat a Moe's sandwich, my everything just squeezes with love and goes, mmm. And the guy who ran the franchise that I was talking to, he says to me, don't you just love it? Don't you just love the feeling of that soft bread in your hands? And he and I were like having foodgasm faces over the counter. Meanwhile, other people who were sitting there eating were making this face like, this is like the worst sandwich I ever ate. But it didn't matter because he loved it so much that like you knew he was going to sell that business very well. Like he was going to make good money out of it. And so I think that people, this is like the longest answer to what seems like a simple question, Josh, but it's on purpose because we must fall in love with the business that we're doing. And a lot of times people don't do that. A lot of times people think, oh, I just need to make some money. I just need a job, whatever. And if you're not in love with it and you're just doing the work to get the check, of course you're going to hate your life. Like there's no one out there going, I can't wait to be bored and miserable and totally out of alignment all day. And yet we think that's the only opportunity available to us. And so that's, another purpose for putting the book together is to say, maybe you can find that path that you want to follow. Not everyone, some people are, just not going to find that exact thing that they need, or some people's biggest passion in life isn't to run a business. So there's a spot in the orchestra for everybody.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, there's this cachet, I think sometimes it's associated with entrepreneurship and doing your own thing, but gosh darn it, there's nothing wrong with not doing that. There's nothing wrong with going and being the best teacher that there is. There's nothing wrong with going and finding whatever it is that you are. And if you have that entrepreneurial spark inside of you, you can really, what I'm finding is that in this day and age, you can really, in any area of work, take it and turn it into an entrepreneurial endeavor, right? I mean, you as a teacher, if you're teaching in front of a classroom, you can now create books and workbooks and audio stuff and videos that you can now sell. And I mean, it's just finding what you can be the master of in your domain and figuring out ways that you can expand upon that, which I love about the day and age we live in, don't you?
Agreed. Yep. There's a lot of times where James Altucher calls it being an employeepreneur. And there's a lot of great opportunities to be an employeepreneur these days and really take what you know and know how to do and how you make it work inside of an organization. So someone might say, I'm just never really going to be a salesperson, but I can really sell ideas, and so they can, be the project manager or they could be the product manager inside of a company and do great. And so, yeah, there's a lot of ways to play. The book, All I Ever Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten, Robert Fulghum, he had a story in there where he talked about a kid who wanted to be in the school play or whatever, and I think it was Cinderella or something, and the kid said, I'm going to be the pig. And the teacher just sort of looked at him like, there's no pig in Cinderella. And he said, well, there is in this play. And so the teacher was like, okay. And so she says, well, what are the pig's lines? And he goes, bark, bark, bark. And she goes, I think pigs oink. He goes, this pig barks.
I love that. First of all, that resonates with me on two levels. First of all, I have a daughter who's in kindergarten right now. Mm-hmm. Second of all, my mom's been a kindergarten teacher for 35 years, and she loves to talk about how everything we all learned in kindergarten. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I love that. I love the creativity of the child. That it's just great. My daughter comes home with all sorts of crazy stuff, and as she's reading a book or looking through a book, I mean, making things up, and it's just
right.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
And the confidence. What I love about the story is not only creativity, but the confidence to say back to the teacher, this pig barks.
Yeah, like this is my show, and I'm going to set the rules, right?
Yeah, and there's a lot to life that works like that. I mean, a lot of the better experiences I've ever had in my life, a lot of the big moments that I've had in my life came from just having enough confidence that everyone else around me just went with it. And, there's a few places in life I don't want that to be true. I don't want someone to be like, well, I'm a surgeon, with that kind of like waver in their voice, like I know how to cut someone open. And then the other one is I don't want somebody to be a commercial airline pilot who's just winging it. Although I always offer to fly planes.
Well, I think that ties into a good point, and a good point that you raise in your book, which I think it's the chapter, Are You a Solo or Small Business Owner? And I know, in that chapter, you have some great information on how to be a freak, how to be who you are and yet still be an owner. And I think that ties into what you're just talking about, which is, how to sort of bring out your uniqueness, but do it in a way so that you're always keeping in mind who you're serving. I mean, can you talk about that distinction a little bit more and why it's so important?
Well, to be an owner, I mean, the big transition from freak to owner is that freak just sort of covers your, I'm kind of a weird person and, I want to do it my way. And by the way, the people who have identified as freaks are like Mitch Jackson, who's California's leading trial attorney, and Rod and Mel, who are two CPAs who run an accounting firm. You know what I mean? So my friends who are identifying as freaks are not tattoo-faced, tongue-pierced people. And so the big transition from freak to owner, though, is taking a deep level of responsibility for, being of service to others, to have continual training and skill growing so that you can grow your capabilities as well as your connections. And that's where, ownership comes in. I mean, the difference between somebody who chooses to buy a franchise and then doesn't really do all the diligence of talking to other owners of that kind of franchise or employees of that kind of franchise to see all of the different things, the person who doesn't really make friends with the other people in the area that they're looking to put that franchise, et cetera, they're missing all those opportunities because as an owner, they haven't really thought through capabilities and connections. And I'd say that that's the big turning point in that particular chapter is that, there's a lot more to it than just saying I'm the boss. And I think a lot of times people believe that everyone expects them to have the answer. And the opposite is really true. The best bosses I know are the ones that are always asking questions.
Yeah, getting other people's perspective. I mean, that's a great sign of leadership too. Always being willing to say, "I don't know, but let's figure this out," or "Can you help me figure out?" or "What do you think about this?" Right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Well, tell me, did you always value systems? I mean, obviously, I love systems. I talk like it franchise. I mean, I talk within franchise euphoria, and everything I do in my law practice is really centered around building and systemizing things. And yet I know firsthand it's hard as hell to do, first of all, and we're always tweaking it. But I also find that, it's almost like a learned thing through experience and possibly failures. I mean, so I'm curious, like, when did you begin to first really value systems and systematizing things?
What time is it right now? I'd say right about now. Um, so the real thing is that I rail against systems all the time, and I am very disruptive to systems. And what I do best is crush old systems and put in newer ones that might be better or may not be. And so I'm very much the disruptor. I'm the one who comes in and says, why do we make it this way? Why is the recipe like that? And that's detrimental to a lot of businesses. It's not necessarily a positive thing to do or be. But what I've also come to learn is that you have to trust the system and you have to have a system in place for a lot of what you do. And for people who are like, no, I don't, I could totally wing it. Well, then, you're not looking for something replicable and you're saying to yourself, I'd like to waste 30% or more of my time, recreating the wheel each time instead of just walking through something now that I know it's the right way. We all have systems. We wake up in the morning, we go to the bathroom, we brush our teeth first thing because maybe we just like that fresh teeth feeling first thing. And that's a system. We just don't talk about it that way. But then thereafter, some people just pack their travel bag and then every time wonder why they forgot their alarm clock or whatever they forgot, as opposed to having a real simple check system that says, here's what I'm going to make sure I put in my bag each time. One of those things I did was, I kept leaving things like my toothbrush home. And so then I said, toothbrushes cost like $4. I'm pretty sure I can spring for a second one for the bag. You know what I mean? So that's system thinking. That's, what's going to make this easier for me. And so, I think it's a crazy person who decides that systems aren't for them, or people who tell me that they're fiercely independent. But there's a lot of dead, fiercely independent people. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
People like,
yeah.
I'm just going to go into that wilderness and die. So I just think that systems don't make you boring. Never looking up from the system makes you boring.
Yeah, and I think in many ways too, it's the difference between a hobbyist and a business. You can have a great hobby, not worry about systems, but if you want to turn it into a business where the goal of a business is to create a lifestyle, but also to create profit, if you have a for-profit business, and the best way to do that is through systematizing. Listen, I am so grateful. Thank you for coming on. I want to totally respect your time here. I do have one final question, and then I'd love for you to tell people how to best get a hold of you, or anything else you'd like to say in closing words. But how do you personally define success for yourself?
My favorite definition of success is fairly personal, but it's being able to say no to the things that I want to say no to. And I say that just because, especially having run consulting companies, there's those times where you take a job for money instead of for love, and it's the worst feeling in the world. And so I just really like to be able to set up my day and my life to a certain measure, and that's success for me.
Well, that is awesome. And for everybody out there, if you haven't already, go buy The Freaks Shall Inherit the Earth, Entrepreneurship for Weirdos, Misfits, and World Dominators. You won't regret it. Trust me, it's a phenomenal book. And Chris, thank you. You're just a stand-up guy, so I really appreciate that.
I'm laying down as you say that, so I feel even better. Thank you, Josh.
And where can people find you? Where can people, what's the best place for people to get a hold of you if they so desire?
Let me wrap it up in an easy bow. If you go to callingallfreaks.com, that redirects you to a page that shows you about the nifty book we were talking about, but it also shows you how to grab my newsletter and all that sort of thing. And the one cool thing about my newsletter is I always write back. So if you say, hey, I heard you on Josh's show, I'll absolutely write you back.
Well, thank you, sir. Really appreciate it. And I look forward to talking sometime in the future.
Sounds great. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Thanks for being with us today on the Franchise Euphoria podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to go to iTunes and provide a review. Also, please remember that although Josh Brown is a licensed and practicing attorney, nothing contained in this podcast should be construed as legal advice, because it is not. The information contained in this podcast is general and educational in nature, and none of it should be relied upon as legal advice. That being said, if you have questions for Josh and would like to contact him, please email him at josh@franchiseeuphoria.com. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope you tune in to our next weekly episode.